Welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast, where we've got two friends, one question, half an hour, and no script. My name is Blaine Smith. As always, my good friend and partner Brandon Young is with us. And today we've got a good topic. We have a question that's sort of an amalgamation of lots of questions that we get, which is something like, what do you read? What are you listening to? Do you have any good podcast recommendations? What kind of books are you reading? Any magazine articles, etc.? And it's a good, but it's a deceptively difficult question, I think, because like most people, we consume a pretty decent amount of media in lots of different forms. And I think, Brandon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we try to be fairly discerning and deliberate with what we choose to consume and not. And I think we're trying to put nutritious brain food in there most of the time, but we're certainly no stranger to social media and other forms of mental junk food. So I'm sorry. We have a guest.
Hello, Penny. What a delightful guest we have on our show this time.
Penny, why don't you just go ahead and get in here in the camera if you're going to
Miss Penny Smith. Hey, you lost some teeth.
Hi.
Penny had a early release day from school today due to snow. And so she is hanging out here at the house, and her mom, Jenny, the best mom in the world,
Yes.
has been keeping her pretty well occupied. And
Actually, I have.
she made
I
me
have another idea.
a bracelet.
Yeah. Well,
That's
that's
good living
wonderful.
right there.
Trying to get
That is good
Right,
living.
Pen?
trying to get
Thank you so much for that. You want to say hi to everybody real quick? You can speak right into that microphone right there and say hi to the world if you want to.
Hi to the world.
All right, Penny, I love
Perfect.
it. Thank you so much.
Well done, Penny.
Hi, Brandon.
Hello, Miss Penny. How are you?
All right, sweetie.
Bye.
I love
Bye.
you. Thanks. Can you close the door? All right.
Well, if that doesn't make this podcast the best one yet, then I don't know what will. So
All
you're
right.
welcome, America, and anybody listening across the globe for that ray of sunshine that has been brought into your life. And by the way, ray of sunshine is necessary at this point in time because it has been about -8 was the lowest it's been over the weekend here in Denver. And Blaine has got big, fluffy silver dollars sized snowflakes falling outside in Maine right now. So, I mean, we'll take all the sunshine we can get.
Yeah, always, especially in that form. So I think what I was saying was we try to be thoughtful about what we consume and what we don't, but it's coming in all shapes and sizes. So it's a good question, and I've thought a little bit about it, but not too much. And maybe I'll send it over to you, Brandon. If someone were to ask you, what are you reading? What are you listening to keep you informed, sane, growing, developing? What pops to mind? Let's get a few out there for the folks.
Yeah. Well, I love this question, and I always start my morning with some time in the Bible. So currently I'm in John, the book of John, one of the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, and I'm currently actually taking it slow, which is a little bit different for me. So I guess it's not only what we're reading, but how we're reading. As most people who know me would know, I just finished a Master's of Divinity at Denver Seminary, so I was consuming an awful lot of content from all directions. And so what I have found over this last couple months here is that I've just been really trying to slow down and really, read with an imaginative bent to it, and just see myself in the text and in what's going on, and just see what that does, how it opens my heart up. I also have been finishing, and by slowing down, I'm saying I might read 5 verses in a morning, very slowly, and just kind of take the time to then convert directly into a practice of gratitude. So that's one of the things that's how I start my morning every morning, with prayer and time in the Bible. And then in the evening, I actually have a little bit of a just kind of a chill that I've been reading in the evening is actually a book called the Green Ember series. I'm looking over here because I've got the paper copies on my shelf. It's by S.D. Smith. Currently on book 3, which is Ember Rising, and it's just a very lighthearted, probably could be considered kind of a young adult's, maybe even children's book. It's about a bunch of rabbits, and the rabbits are fighting the evil birds of prey and wolves army that are up against them. And it was given to me by a friend as a suggestion. By the way, he was my academic advisor, Tim Kohler, coming out of seminary. He said, "Here you go, and you're welcome." Since you've been reading so much dense stuff. So I read that in the evening. I usually will get a couple chapters in. It's a really, really easy read. Another book that I am actually reading right now that I've been looking forward to reading quite a bit is A Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman. He, for 4 decades, so he is a rabbi and a family therapist by trade, and for 4 decades has had a practice. He's passed now, but had a practice in the DC area. He was also a advisor for presidents from LBJ all the way to President Clinton. And essentially, he's talking about what leadership looks like in an age of the hyper-anxious societal trend. What does leadership look like in the age of anxiety, and how, a lot of us are facing really a failure of nerve to confront some of the difficult things that are really stymieing our progress. So those are the books that I am currently reading right now. And I'll stop there. I know we can get to podcasts in a moment here, but I'll shoot it over to you with just the little bit of this, is that, an intention that I have as I go through this is that I really learned how to read very fast in my grad school program. I would have never described myself as a fast reader. I was actually quite a slow reader. And I don't want to lose that skill. And so I kind of keep that up with specific types of reading, such as Failure of Nerve, where I'm really looking, to professionally develop and understand some of the content. Whereas in other settings, for example, reading the Green Ember series, I'm really actually focusing on just taking it easy, like I'm just kind of walking through a field. So I think it's valuable not only to share with people what we're reading, but how we're reading it and for what purpose.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. And I'll tell you, just for context, looking back probably 10 or 8 years ago even, I remember sending books out to the team at Team RWB, and you telling me at one point, like, dude, I don't read a lot of books. Like, do I have to read all of this, or is this something that's like required? And to see now, fast forward 8 or 10 years, the quantity of reading you were doing in grad school and just ripping through books. I mean, that's a major transformation for you, which I'm sure was taxing, but probably is going to be a huge benefit to you the rest of your life. The ability to like get into a book and read it quickly if you need to. And it's pretty impressive just to see from my perspective.
Well, I remember, I'll put myself on Front Street. We were out in Detroit for a regional summit with Zach Armstrong and his team. And the 3 of us were driving, I think, to the airport. And you and Zach were in the front seat and I was in the back seat. And you guys were talking about some stuff that you're reading and just kind of going back and forth and talking about it and this and that. And I remember Zach's like, "Brandon, what are you reading right now?" And I'm like, "I'm not reading anything, man." I'm like, I gotta be honest with you. I'm not spending a lot of time reading much of anything. And then I was like thinking about it, it's like, I'm not sure if I should feel bad or embarrassed or anything, but that's just the truth. But fast forward to today, I definitely have become much more of a reader, and I really enjoy it. And that's the thing, is I came home from that trip and I went to a Barnes and Noble and I said, I used to love reading. And I would love to recapture some kind of an enjoyment for reading. And the kind woman who worked there, she's like, I got just the thing for you. And she handed me the book, All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh,
And I
wow.
read it, and it just ignited my interest in reading again. So there's just a short story for everybody. If you're having trouble finding stuff that you want to read, start with going to find something that sounds interesting that you want to read.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's a great point. The other point I just wanted to highlight that you made, I think is super important, is this idea of kind of digestion versus just ingestion. And there are certain books, if you want to read a thriller or a novel, that kind of thing, you read it for pure enjoyment. And if it's a page turner, keep turning the pages, obviously. But if it's something that you're reading for introspection or to gain new information or develop a skill or challenge yourself on something that you may or may not believe, I think being able to take the time to really digest what you're reading and thinking about it is super important. And I think, and I've been there. I know lots of people that are listening have also been there, where you're just kind of knocking books off the list, or you're setting a goal to read a certain number of books and that kind of thing. And, I'm not saying that's bad, but I do think there's a lot of value, especially if you're reading something that's dense or meaningful, to spend some time with it and really make sure that you're able to digest it and get something out of it, rather than just kind of passing it through the system and moving on to the next book. I'll share a few. Over the last several years, and certainly recently, I've been trying to find things to read that feel a bit more timeless. So in some cases, I've read some older stuff. A few years ago, I really got into reading a big, wide range of kind of philosophical and spiritual stuff to kind of give myself a bit of a tapestry on some of the big topics. But I found some stuff that's been published pretty recently that I've enjoyed that really taps into some timeless principles. So I'll offer a couple. I really like Morgan Housel. If you can find his blog, it is great if you want some bite-sized stuff. His book, The Psychology of Money, came out a couple of years ago, and it kind of exploded as a sleeper bestseller. Really good, really easy to read, very, clean concepts that I think anyone can understand and put into practice, which I really like. Very recently, I've read his latest book, which is called Same as Ever, which is a book about things that don't change. And I really liked it because we're living in a world right now where it feels like so much is changing so rapidly. And a lot of our attention is being placed on what's going to change, what's around the corner. And he kind of took a step back and slowed it down and wrote a book about, well, I can't predict what's going to change next year, but here are some things that if you look back are kind of always the same. And a lot of it's around human nature and things like that, which I'm already interested in. So Morgan Housel, Same as Ever, I really like that book a lot. I'm also in the middle of reading right now Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is kind of like a compendium of talks and written works from Charlie Munger, who just passed recently. He's famously Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, and sort of famous for being dry-witted, sharp-tongued, kind of doesn't care who he pisses off. Has made zillions of dollars and really only came into any public consciousness much later in his life. But an incredible big-time businessman, a family man, a philanthropist. And there's a ton of stuff in Poor Charlie's Almanac where Munger talks about, look, these are just sort of the principles. These are the mental models, the basic core principles of things like physics and mathematics and psychology that everyone should know if you want to be kind of a high-functioning human. And I've enjoyed reading it because it's just sort of fun, but also there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And the third thing that I'm kind of rereading, or I spend a little time with every morning myself, is Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. And they're kind of the moral letters to Lucilius. And it's all just, if you read one chapter a morning, and like you, I try to spend some time with it and think about it. And I've got my highlighter and my pen, and I kind of make marks. I sort of have this idea in my head that maybe someday my kids will find these books in a dusty heap in the basement or something and read them and be like, oh, this is what Dad was thinking about. But I'm sure that's actually not going to happen. But
My kids be, that's what he was thinking about?
yeah, exactly. But yeah, so those are the things that I'm reading. I do try to have one fiction thing going all the time, like some novel that I can just read before bed. I really like Gillian Flynn. She's the woman that wrote Gone Girl, which is an absolute page turner. If you've not read that book, that one's so good. So I've read a couple of her things, and I like to have something like that on the bedside just to kind of keep me awake at night before I just pass out in one page of reading something more dense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't read much else though, to be honest. I don't really read much online news. I don't follow the news very closely, to be candid. I don't really read any sports blogs or anything like that anymore. I used to consume a lot more of that stuff, but I just slowly but surely have kind of weaned off of it. I don't think for any particular reason other than just I've just found my attention pointed toward other stuff, and I feel like I'm kind of better and probably better informed and less anxious as a result of it.
Yeah. I've definitely found that the same. I remember back in our Quest Diagnostics Ameripath days, driving 60,000 miles a year, lots of windshield time, and I could have told you probably every single roster of every NHL team. I could have told
Yeah.
you quarterback ratings. I was just like, I had it. I knew it
Yeah.
because I was just consuming so much of it. And I, I tell people now that I don't watch a whole lot of sports. For my kind of main love sport was NHL hockey, and yeah, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I remember when the San Jose Sharks were awarded to us in 1991, so I'm part of the legion of tortured San Jose Sharks fans. And what I would tell people is that I don't watch it much because I can't passively watch it. And that's true. And after many years away from consuming a lot of that information, which, hey, if you're into that, cool, right on. I could just tell you that I am also much less anxious and fired up and much less tied to the results of a game. In fact, Kelly and I were at a brewery last night, and the AFC wildcard game was on, and she said, "So, like, who are we thinking is supposed to be like the favorite this year?" I said, "I don't know. I got nothing.
Yeah.
I have no idea."
It's weird. It's weird after
and
a lifetime of being a serious sports fan to sort of be oblivious. A guy asked me at the gym this morning, "Hey, did you watch the games this weekend?" And I was like, "No, gosh, who was playing?" And I felt like some kind of like chump. Like he's like, "Would you never play sports growing up? What's the deal? You're a dude and you don't know what's going on in the NFL?" And I'm like, "I guess, yeah. Dang, what happened to me?"
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, and as you mentioned news, I'll come to that. Is I have had a very tenuous relationship with media news, the big news outlets and whatnot. Basically, ever since the war, if I could be completely honest, is I would see things or hear things that were broadcast and kind of have a little bit more information on the back end of what was actually happening on the ground. And that's really where I started to get quite skeptical. And now we live in an era where some of the terms that I'm hearing out there are a post-truth era, which is a fascinating term. But I do try to, and it's something that I have an intention of doing, is I do want to know what's going on out there in the world. And so I do access very limited sources. I'm kind of a free press Barry Weiss fan myself.
Yeah.
I find her podcast, honestly, to just be very thoughtful and very earnest, and that's what I appreciate most about it. I find that she gives you the ability, she assumes that you have the intelligence to decide what you think on your own. So I just think it's good journalism. So I look for sources like that. Her site, The Free Press, is one that I will access and just kind of check out for what's going on out there in the world, because I do want to be aware of what's going on, and I certainly have opinions. We're recording this in the middle of January 2024 right now, and there's a lot going on. We're all ramping up for what should be another fascinating election year here, and it's already going, and not to overshadow the fact that there's a war going on in Israel and in Ukraine, and those are things that I care about. So
Yep.
yeah, I think it's important to kind of take a look around as well, and I try to check out things like the Wall Street Journal, like I said, the Free Press, and then other sources just to see what different angles there are. But admittedly, I'm not going to spend 30 minutes a day doing that. I'm just not going. There are the things that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do agree that looking up and looking around and being informed is important. I have a friend down in Tampa named Jack Burns. He's just a really smart young guy, Naval Academy grad, went to MBA at Georgetown. And he has a Substack where he kind of has reads of the week and things like that. And so I know him and I trust him and I know he's really smart. So I just kind of like read the stuff that he recommends and I'm like, feel pretty good. It's generally smart stuff. And I don't need a whole lot. I'll occasionally check out the things on the right-hand side and LinkedIn, just basic business news and things like that, just to stay reasonably informed on basic kind of social, economic, and geopolitical stuff. But I more or less try to stay out of anything that's churning on the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, as do I. I think you also make an interesting point that it's our relationships. You know, who are the people that you actually know and that you actually value their perspective. You spent time with them. There's trust that has been developed. I know for me, I've got a number of friends, you included, Sarah included, where we share articles that we found were interesting, or we might share podcasts that we found were interesting. And I just say that I'm very likely to access any of that because I trust those people, and I have removed myself from the social media spin cycle. I just am not really in it. I'm not super interested, and I find that it's really not very valuable what I see there. But when a good friend sends me a Wall Street Journal article, like my good friend John Beagle will do often, or a really good friend Amy Ali Ashmerny, she'll send me some things to take a look at, and I just think I appreciate it and I love it, and I'm particularly thankful for the fact that I get a diverse set of looks from different people who I trust, who all come to life from different worldviews, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that is definitely the way to go. A good recommendation on anything, whether it's news, media, art, whatever, dinner is always what I'm looking for. Let's talk a little bit about podcasts, because that's where a lot of people are consuming their information now via audio, even if it's audio books. I've got a few that I can kind of rattle off here. I think we might have some overlap, but one that I listen to fairly regularly that I get so much value out of is Invest Like the Best with Patrick O'Shaughnessy. I'm not a huge, markets investing guy personally, but I find so many of his guests to be fascinating. And I do think people that are involved in the markets and private equity and venture capital, they're just good thinkers, many of them. And I appreciate they have sometimes very orthogonal views on things, and they're smart people, and I just find that I learn so much from kind of hearing their ideas and learning their stories and seeing the way they go about things. So I think that's a really good one. If folks aren't listening to it, I would definitely recommend it. I listen to Honestly fairly regularly, thanks to you. That's a good sort of source of current events, so to speak, a lot of times from primary sources, which is good. They've had a lot of presidential candidates on directly being interviewed, which I think is good to hear straight from them. What else here? I do still catch the occasional kind of big time mainstream podcast. Like, it's really only if there's a topic or a guest I'm super interested in. So I'll catch the occasional Tim Ferriss podcast or Rich Roll podcast or that kind of thing, or Freakonomics Radio, if I see one come across my feed that really piques my interest. But I don't listen to any of those anymore with any kind of consistency. I've been following a little bit more closely this guy named Scott Galloway, which some people will know. He's a marketing professor at NYU Stern. He's been involved in tech and entrepreneurship, though, for a long time. He's an interesting guy. He's in his 50s. He's got a couple of sons. He teaches young people at NYU. And he's just a very plain spoke. He's very smart and has a very wide range of ideas that he talks about. Everything from technology and the markets to things like challenges with boys and young men right now, and masculinity. And these are things, as a father of two teenage boys, I'm thinking a lot about what the world's going to look like in 10 or 20 years, but even in the next 1 or 2 years as they go off to college and that kind of thing. And I find him to be a very sane and kind of sober voice, and just has a lot of very interesting insights into things and isn't afraid to say what he thinks. So I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he's an interesting follow. So I've been kind of following him a bit more closely. And then I've got a couple other ones I just sort of listen to for entertainment. I listen to Talking Elite Fitness, which is sort of a CrossFit podcast, which I enjoy. I really like keeping up with that space. I've been involved in CrossFit for a long time. Two of my favorite brands, Go Ruck and CrossFit, have now joined forces to be partners in the next few years. So that's really cool. I've been keeping up with that. And then the last two I'll just mention. I listen sometimes, again, just kind of for my own interest when I don't have anything else going on, to Two Sides of Phi, which is a couple of friends that one of them has retired early and one of them is in pursuit of retiring early. And they talk a little bit about, their lives and personal finance and that kind of thing, which I find to be interesting. Again, I'm not a financial guru by any means or that interested in money at all, but I do think keeping your house in order and understanding personal finance is a pretty good thing to know about. So I listened to some of that, and someone turned me on recently to My First Million, which is another kind of interesting podcast where they've got guests that come on and talk about how they've managed to earn some degree of financial freedom. And I like that one especially because it's mostly younger people, and I enjoy hearing from and learning from and kind of keeping up with what people younger than me are doing, because we're getting to a certain age, Brandon, and I hate to admit it, but there are a lot of people now that are quite a bit younger than us that are doing some pretty amazing things, and we have a lot to learn from. So I don't want to lose touch with that. As I age, I don't want to just kind of be like, well, back in my day. I'm curious to hear what these people are doing, and if I can't replicate it, I'm at least interested to see.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's so interesting to me because you do have a thread of economics that goes through your listening the frequency. There's a thread of economics, but it makes a lot of sense. Some of the great explainers of culture and reality, for time immemorial have been looking at things from an economic perspective, because it really starts to demonstrate human behavior. That's really what it does more than anything else. So I love it. So I am also, as I've already said, I'm kind of an honestly fanboy, thanks to my friend Amy. She shared that with me, and I just think that they do a really great job. They have a lot of really good interviews, a lot of thoughtful content, and that I appreciate very much. This year I've been actually going back to, I've picked up a podcast called Being Known with Kurt Thompson, MD. And the way Kurt Thompson describes himself is that his work, so he's a psychiatrist by trade, and his work occurs at the intersection of neurobiology and the gospel. So he's a fascinating guy. I was introduced to him in my studies at Denver Seminary, and one of the most intriguing things that he says very often, I'll never forget, is we are always looking for someone who is looking for us. We enter the world looking for someone looking for us. And that is kind of the consistent story. You think about connections and people, and he really gets into the neurobiological aspects of that. And I've just really enjoyed the heck out of that. So I went back and started at episode 1, and I'm just listening as I go. That's been really rich for me this year. Another one that I just get a kick out of is Business Wars by Wondery. I think it's so fascinating. I think the last one I listened to was either Target versus Walmart or Apple versus Microsoft. And to me, what's really fascinating as a small business owner is just to look at these companies that we all know so well and track the storyline to see how many decisions were made, how many acts of courage it took to get to where they are right now. And it's not a monolith. No story is the same, as every story is uniquely different, and yet you can see some themes there that we talk about all the time in leadership, like ownership, themes like empowerment and accountability, effective decision making, vision casting, all of those different things. So Those are the main ones that I find myself in right now, along with some other little snippets here and there. Like I listen to The Legends of the 75th, which is a really fun one that Mike Burke and Clay Usi are doing, kind of giving it's almost like a family album in voice. It's hysterical. So that one's been a real joy as well. And other than that, the last thing that I will say is that I actually, more than anything, listen to a lot of music. And that has been a real joy for me. I often am listening to music when I'm writing. There are some certain Switchfoot albums that I will put on that I'll just go in a loop, and it's almost like a Pavlovian response. I won't stop writing. I'll look up, and it'll be 30 minutes, 45 minutes down the path, or just really listening to a whole lot of music from different genres. So that's where I'm at right now. A lot of music right now as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't say anything about music, but we're both big kind of music guys. I love music from all eras and different genres, and it's nice having a business partner that appreciates music as well, because we get to share some stuff around. And yeah, sometimes that's the best thing to do, is just get in the car and I reach for a podcast or the news or NPR or something, and I'm like, I just need to listen to some music. That's probably the way to go.
Yeah, I can tell that I've at least in this context raised my children right, because we'll do fun things together. Like over the holidays, Jaden and I created together a new playlist called 90s Hip Hop Gems. And the whole thing, and I'm going to leave everybody with this as your challenge. This is what my son and I have done together. You only can add one song to the list per artist. So what is the one song from that 90s hip-hop artist that you would add to that list? Or you could do it with any genre, any era, but one song. You can't add all of Biggie's hits. You can't add all of Wu-Tang's hits. You got to just pick one song.
Ooh, yeah.
One song. That's the challenge. So I think that's a good place to leave everyone off on that one. It's a thinker, and if you want to send us your playlists, we'll listen to it.
Yeah,
that'll happen.
Or your
you can
book
send your
and podcast
playlists,
recommendations. We'll take
or you
those
can
as well.
send
Send
any of your questions for future episodes to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com, and we would love to chop it up unscripted. So with that, we're going to sign off for this go around, and we'll see you guys on the next one. And please tell us what you're listening to. Tell us what you're reading. Tell us the sources of media that you're accessing, and we'd love to interact with you guys. Thanks again for listening.